New rules in France covering electric car incentives will favour European-made vehicles over those made in China. The French government currently offers buyers subsidies of up to $7,500 per car.
But tougher criteria, including a limit on the amount of carbon emitted during manufacturing and shipping, means that many electric vehicles made in China and the United States will be excluded from this scheme. Well, Peter Wells is the director of the Centre for Automotive Industry Research at Cardiff University. He believes the intervention is more about market share than environmental concerns.
Well, the heart of it is really a global competition for control over the future electric vehicle industry. Who makes those cars, where they're made, who makes money from them, who benefits, who loses. And this is one part of that global battle.
The tricky thing is, there's no such thing as a national car company anymore, is there? You can no longer say it's British, it's German, it's French, it's American, it's Chinese. Everybody seems to own a bit of everything in different countries.
It is certainly very complex, and that means that trying to control markets in this way or control where industries operate is also very complex. And this is a classic example. We see here regulation intended to protect French producers and yet manufacturers, and yet at the same time, some of the companies that will be hit by this are owned by French interests. So I think what we see here is the interconnection of different parts of the industry form a really complex web around the world. And governments at both national and indeed regional level, including regions like the European Union, are trying, in the midst of all of those networks, to create industrial economic benefit for their interests in their locations.
Is this about the law of unintended consequences or simple, naked French protectionism?
Well, there is an underlying logic to looking at the whole environmental life cycle cost of electric vehicles. There's a lot of energy needed in production. On the other hand, the way that this particular intervention has been created by the French government is clearly biased towards supporting their own commercial interests rather than just pursuing an environmental strategy. To put this in kind of context, if you look at the carbon cost of electricity production across Europe, typically last year, this year, you're looking at around 250 or so grams per kilowatt hour to produce electricity. In France, it's near 44 grams per kilowatt hour because they have a large already invested capacity in nuclear power. That counts as zero emissions. I think whether from an environmental perspective we agree with that calculation and agree with the idea that nuclear power is zero emissions, I think that's problematic. But as far as the French government is concerned and as far as the European Union is concerned, that's currently how nuclear power is counted, and therefore the French industry comes out looking very well from this kind of regulation.
Can you give us a very quick overview of the current state of the electric vehicle market in France and perhaps the significance of the state bonus scheme for eligible models?
Well, the market in France for electric vehicles, like much across Europe, has been growing pretty steadily. They're expecting more growth into the future. We see at the moment it's approximately 13% of new registrations are electric vehicles. So that's a kind of good base, and the market is growing quite strongly. But like many other countries across Europe, there's a bias towards these larger, heavier electric vehicles, and they tend to be more expensive as well. So really there's a need for smaller, cheaper, more efficient electric vehicles to make a proper spread of market offerings in France and indeed in other markets across Europe. So you can see that this sort of regulation doesn't particularly, certainly in the short term, doesn't really help that, because some of the lowest cost market entries from companies like Dacia, which is owned by Renault, or companies like BYD, which is coming out of China, they're offering nice low-cost vehicles, but they are precisely the vehicles that will be penalized by this new regulation, this new incentive structure that the French have put in place.